Start with our summary: verbal behavior. In other words, verbal operants. Okay, it's what we call each modality of verbal behavior. And verbal behavior in ABA is socially mediated, meaning there's a speaker and a listener. Okay, and when you're taking your exam, you need to be really careful about who you are being asked about. In other words, is the question asking about the speaker behavior or the listener behavior? Because it matters. Okay, socially mediated mean there are more than one party involved. Okay, with verbal behavior, we are concerned with function over form. We're more concerned with what purpose does the language serve? What purpose does the verbal behavior serve, rather than what it looks like? And finally, what do you need to know? You need to know what evokes the behavior. Why is the verbal behavior occurring? Is it verbal SDs, nonverbal SDs, etc.? What reinforces the behavior? Okay, what maintains and increases that verbal behavior? Is there formal similarity, meaning is the form of communication the same or different? And is there point-to-point correspondence, meaning what is being communicated? Is it exactly alike or is it not? So that is what we're going to look at as we go through each verbal operant associated with verbal behavior. Mands, first off, okay? Mands, I think everyone is pretty familiar with, right? When we man for something, when a client mans for something, what are they doing? Well, they're making a request. They're asking for something, whether it's to gain access to an item, get out of doing something, they're making a request. A mand is evoked by a motivating operation, meaning something is motivating this person where there's an establishing operation or an abolishing operation for a consequence. So the mand is there to maybe escape from something due to an MO, or we're trying to gain access to something due to an MO. The most common form is hunger, right? The hunger is the MO to man for food. So when we talk about mands, and this is very important, if it's not evoked by an MO, it's not a mand. And we're going to look at tacts next. But if you see an object, let's say a cookie, for example, and you say cookie in the presence of a cookie, that isn't a mand, okay? The mand has to come from the MO. And then it's reinforced by the requested item. So how do we man train? Well, whatever the speaker requests for, we need to deliver. That's how we're going to train them to continue manding for that. So if they're manding for attention, provide attention. If they're manding for escape, provide escape, so on and so forth. Some basic examples of mands. Cookie, please, meaning I'm hungry, I want a cookie. What is your name? The MO is there's a person, I don't know your name. There's value in obtaining that name. So I say, what is your name? And this is where it's important, okay, when we're talking about the speaker or the listener, okay, because we're looking at the behavior here. If the listener responds with their name, then the listener is engaging in an intraverbal. But the what is your name is the mand. So you have to be very careful there, right? And then put me down, of course, is escape. It's a request, and it's evoked by the MO because you want to escape, I guess, being held or wherever the situation is occurring where you want to be put down. All these are evoked by an MO. They request, and they're reinforced by the requested item. So we would reinforce with a cookie. We would reinforce by saying our name, and we would reinforce by putting the person down. Okay, a tact. A tact is a speaker labeling something in the environment. It's as simple as that. You see something, you label it. Therefore, it's evoked by a nonverbal SD. And when we mean a nonverbal SD, we mean it's not spoken, okay? It's not communicated. You see something, you label it. Very, very simple verbal operant. It's reinforced by a generalized conditioned reinforcer, meaning tokens and praises and money, all of those generalized conditioned reinforcers that can be used in a variety of settings. Because, for example, if I'm tacting a cow on the highway, how am I going to reinforce that person tacting the cow? Well, I can't give them the cow, right? But I can praise them. I can give them a nickel. I can give them a high five. I can give them a token. I can use some sort of GCR, okay, to tact train. And the reinforced is important because when we're talking about training verbal operants, we need to know what is the proper way to reinforce. So for tact training, we want to reinforce labeling of things in their environment spontaneously, right? Spontaneously using GCR. When I say spontaneously, I mean, if you ask somebody, what is that? And they tell you. That is not a tact. Why? Because it is evoked by the nonverbal SD. I mean, it's evoked by a verbal SD. If I say, what is that? And you tell me that's an intraverbal, we need to make sure it's evoked by the nonverbal SD. Remember, all this is the very basics. Okay, so we have tact extensions and things like that, but we're just worried about the very basic tact at this moment. Okay, if it's evoked by a verbal SD, it isn't a tact. It has to be evoked by a non-verbal SD. Some examples: cookie, in the presence of cookie. So I'm actually saying cookie. Compare that to manding, right? Where I want cookie. There's not even a cookie present. You're just in the presence of an MO, or the MO, in other words, is evoking the mand. In this case, you see a cookie, you label the cookie, evoked by a nonverbal SD. We're going to consider it a tact. Cow, when you drive by a cow on the highway, so you see the cow, you say cow. Plane, when you see a plane in the sky, you see a plane, you say plane. All of these are evoked by these nonverbal SDs. You're labeling things in your environment. Echoic, speaker repeats exactly what they heard. So echolalia, right? Very common in autism. Okay, very, very common. You say something, you give an SD, and the person just copies the SD, right? That's an echoic. It's evoked by a verbal SD, right? So I say something, or a speaker says something, and the listener responds with exactly what was said. If we're echoic training, we're reinforcing by GCRs like praises, money, and tokens. It has point-to-point correspondence, meaning what is said by the speaker is said exactly the same by the listener. And it has formal similarity, meaning the forms of communication are the same. I say something, the listener says something. Spoken, spoken. The forms of communication are the same between the speaker and the listener. Some examples. I say cookie after my brother says cookie. There's point to point because cookie and cookie are the same. There's formal similarity because my brother says and I say, so the form of communication is exactly the same. And it's evoked by the verbal SD. Saying stop copying me after your mom says stop copying me, verbal SD, point to point, formal similarity. Formal similarity, in other words, is the mode of communication is the same. So how do we communicate? Well, we can speak, we can write, we can sign, we can give pictures. All those are the forms of communication. If there's formal similarity, then the form of communication is the same. Point to point is what is being communicated. And when what is being communicated is exactly the same, we say it has point to point. So when echoic needs to be point to point, have formal similarity, and be evoked by a verbal SD. An intraverbal, okay, this is like our conversation, right? Speaker responds to another person with conversation, okay? Evoked by a verbal SD. So I say something, I say, what's your name? And you say, Alex. That is where you are engaging in an intraverbal, right? If I say, what's your name? And you say, what's your name? That's going to be in echoic, okay? Start to understand why you need to know what the technicalities of each of these, right? It's reinforced through social reinforcement because we're communicating. There is no point-to-point correspondence. If there was point-to-point correspondence, it would be more of an echoic. And it may have formal similarity, but it doesn't have to. So if I say cookie after your teacher says, what do you want? That is an intraverbal. If I respond Alex after someone says, what is your name? Again, that's an intraverbal, right? Evoked by the verbal SD. There's no point-to-point correspondence. And then writing dog after your RBT says, what is it? So be careful here, right? We don't have point-to-point correspondence. It was evoked by a verbal SD. And even though it doesn't have formal similarity, it doesn't have to, right? We're still communicating with our response of, what is it? Dog, okay? So again, formal similarity is the mode of communication. May be the same. It might not be, though. And there's no point-to-point correspondence, meaning what is being said by the speaker and the listener is going to be different. An intraverbal is most commonly known as a conversation. Again, we're just covering the very basics here. Yes, we can get much more technical here, but we're not trying to do that when we're learning, okay? Make it simple at first. And once you master the simplicity and you master the simple parts, then we can dive deeper, okay? But we want to keep it as simple as possible at first, right? Because a lot of times it's all you really need. Okay, textuals. Textuals, speaker reads something. So we are reading. Essentially, that's what we're doing, right? It's evoked by a nonverbal SD, typically a written SD, right? Whether a sign or a book, whatever it might be. You reinforce with a generalized condition reinforcer. There is point-to-point correspondence because whatever you're reading, okay, you're going to read exactly as it is printed or written. And what you're being communicating is exactly the same as what you're reading, typically on a sign or a book. And there's no form of similarity, right? Because you're reading typically written word. Those forms are different. Some examples. You read cookie, printed on a cookie jar, okay? Evoked by the nonverbal SD. We have point-to-point correspondence because you're reading the word cookie exactly, but the form isn't the same. It's written versus you reading. Or you read out loud to a class from a book or a prepared speech. Point-to-point correspondence. What you read is exactly what is printed. No form of similarity. The form of communication is different. So reading versus written. And then transcription, finally, writing something down that is spoken, taking notes, transcribing something in a courtroom. It's evoked by a verbal SD. Someone's talking to you when you're writing notes. It's reinforced by a generalized conditioned reinforcer. There's going to be point-to-point correspondence because you're writing what the person is saying, and there's no form of similarity because you are writing and the person is talking. The forms are different. A few examples of transcriptions are taking notes, transcribing something in a courtroom. Again, point-to-point, writing exactly what is heard, no form of similarity, writing versus spoken. Point-to-point and no form of similarity can be the hardest things to learn if you're brand new to this. It gives people the most trouble. The only way to do it is to practice. Write a bunch of examples out, do a bunch of examples, try to identify, do I have point-to-point? Do I have form of similarity? Yes or no? All right. Especially if you're a BCBA taking the BCBA exam, you really need to know that. These questions are very easy. Verbal behavior, verbal operant questions should be very easy. Okay. Don't take them for granted. You want to get these points on your exam. So again, study, point-to-point and form of similarity. Make sure you understand it. And then finally, what do you need to know for verbal behavior? You need to know what evokes it. This is going to be a verbal SD. What about a nonverbal SD? What reinforces it? Generalized condition reinforcers. Giving somebody what they ask for, such as a Mand, or maybe social reinforcement. Do we have point-to-point correspondence? What is being communicated is exactly the same between the listener and the speaker, or is it not? Then formal similarity. Is the form of communication the same? Spoken and spoken, written and written, versus spoken and written, or spoken and signed. Those forms are different versus spoken and spoken, where the forms are the same. All right. Thank you for watching. As always, please check out bcbastudy.com for the BCBA materials and rbtexamreview.com for the RBT materials. We offer the best exam prep in the business. Any questions, comments, please let me know. As always, enjoy your July 4th. Work hard, study hard. I'll see you soon.